Uh, the T wave axis is not so much important, but the P wave axis is very important, particularly when you are doing a focal atrial tachycardia and you have to find out where is the source of focal atrial tachycardia. So we'll be talking in detail about the P wave axis when we'll be talking about the focal atrial tachycardia localization. So now I would move, Dr. Claire will be talking about the electrophysiology of ischemia and common arrhythmias.
Right, sir. Sir, there are a few more questions, so maybe we'll take it up after Dr. Claire's session.
Right.
Yeah.
So, Arju, am I audible?
Yes, sir, you're audible and you're visible.
Well, first of all, I think I will thank Boston for helping us to design this ECG Academy module. And we thought ECG is, though looks very simple, but it is still a complicated affair, number one. Number two, it gives a lot of information. It's perhaps, in my view, ECG is the most cost-effective investigation in cardiology. So let's see the Nash, slide नहीं move कर रही आगे.
Okay, it's moving. It's moving. So yeah.
Okay.
Let me just put on this.
Okay. So see, what I'm going to cover is what is the mechanism of arrhythmias, and I will classify arrhythmias and some mechanistic insight into the common arrhythmias. Number two part is the ECG physiology of ischemia. What is the current of injury? What is the mechanism of ST elevation in myocardial infarction? What is the mechanism of ST depression? And the mechanism of STD changes in myocardial infarction mimics. So let's go to arrhythmias first. The mechanisms are basically two: either disorder of impulse formation or disorder of pulse conduction. When we come to the impulse formation, then we have basically two issues. One is the automaticity, another is triggered activity. In automaticity, you have either altered normal automaticity or you have abnormal automaticity. We'll cover it later. And triggered activity is two types. One is delayed after depolarization, another is early after depolarization. Coming to the re-entry, it is either it could be anatomical re-entry. That means that there is a circuit which is anatomically definable, or it is a functional re-entry. So this is there are two types of action potential. This is the action potential of the His-Purkinje system, the automaticity after depolarizations, sinus node, APCs, BPCs, and this is the myocardial cell action potential, which I think Avinash has also shown you. It has 0, phase, 1, 2, 3, and 4 phases. So when we talk the conduction of myocardial, action potential depolarization, it is atrial or ventricular myocardium origin. So there has to be slow conduction area, isthmus, and there is a re-entry. So coming to the enhanced automaticity, here it is a, see, this is a resting action membrane action potential. The this is the resting membrane potential, and this is the threshold. So if the change of the action potential, the membrane occurs to this level, then the only depolarization will start. So this is normal. Now there could be a decrease in threshold voltage, like for example, this example, the threshold has gone down. So there is a start of action potential before the before the real threshold, because threshold has come down in this situation, and then there is a increased membrane diastolic potential like this. Then this is the phase 4. It starts upward, and you go to a threshold level again, and there is the action potential like this. Coming to the increased slope, phase 4 depolarization. This is a phase 4 depolarization. This is threshold here, and this is the membrane diastolic potential. Here is the baseline, and here, if the phase 4 starts rising, so your membrane diastolic potential reaches threshold early and you have action potential. And here it is delayed one. This is a delayed, this is early. See, we have two types of these after depolarizations. So when we talk about the parasystole, in parasystole, primarily there are two foci. One is it could be a sinus node, another could be any other focus either in the atria or the ventricle. Both are independently beating from each other. So in the parasystole, there is an entrance block. So there is no electricity which could go into that focus. So it goes on firing independently, and the other focus like the sinus node will go on firing independently. So what happens? There is the independent topic rhythm competing with sinus rhythm. There is a variable coupling interval. The topic interval is always multiple of the basic topic rate. So let's say this is a parasystole. This interval will be some multiple of the ectopic intervals, because this is a totally independent focus and the sinus focus is totally different. This is called parasystole. So this is a now triggered activity. Triggered activity is also, this is phase 2 early after depolarization. See, this is the phase 2. Then if there is a depolarization in the early phase, this is called phase 2 early depolarization. This is phase 3 early depolarization. See, the action potential is going down, then it starts going up. And when it is in the repolarization phase, phase 4, then it's called delayed after depolarizations. So these are the basic mechanisms of a triggered activity, which you need to remember. So representation of triggered activity, A is phase 2 early after depolarization. This is phase 3 early depolarization, phase B, and this is delayed after depolarization. So these are the three types of triggered activity which you need to remember. Okay, so this is the early after depolarization is very common in the His-Purkinje system. So you have examples like VPCs, Torsad, long QT interval, ischemia, hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, heart failure, hypokalemia, and drugs. There are a lot, these are the very, very common way of arrhythmia production. This is a active phase. During phase 2 or 3 of the action potential shifts in the inward direction due to the either a reduction in the outward potassium or an increased calcium influx into the cells, and that is why you develop these depolarizations. So when we come to the causes of early after depolarization, that means phase 2, there are many causes, slow heart rate, mechanical stretch, hypokalemia, and blah blah. There are many drugs, erythromycin. All these could cause early after depolarization. Now, delayed after depolarization. Here, if you see here, it is very small after depolarization. So this will not be enough to induce a full-fledged depolarization. And if it's a little bigger, like B, again it is unable to produce the depolarization. But if it reaches that magnitude, it reaches the threshold. If it reaches the threshold, then you have arrhythmia production. This is how the after depolarization of significant amplitude, they can produce the arrhythmias. And the examples are RBOT, VPCs, ventricular tachycardia, idiopathic repetitive monomer VT, digitalis induced arrhythmia. They are all basic mechanisms after depolarization as the etiology of the production of these arrhythmias. So coming to the re-entry. The re-entry is very common again. It could be anatomical, it could be functional. It has a leading circle, it has an isotropic re-entry, a figure of 8 re-entry and spiral wave re-entry. Now there has to be requisites for re-entry. What are the requisites? There has to be a substrate, central area of block, unidirectional conduction block in the circuit, area of slow conduction, critical tissue mass, and initiating trigger. We'll explain it further. See, here is a substrate, there is the area of slow conduction, and there is a area of long refractory conduction, and plus you need a re-entry mechanism. So there is something called excitable gap. You know, excitable gap means that by the time electricity reaches at this place, this tissue should be excitable again. Now this could be absolute complete excitable or relative excitable condition. Now what happens? There is a trigger. Trigger is, for example, there is a premature impulse. We are talking about, for example, here it's a AV node re-entry. Premature impulse comes down, it conducts over the slow pathway, and by the time it reaches here, because the premature impulse gets blocked in a unidirectional way, because it's so premature that the fast pathway has not still recovered. It is refractory, so the pulse will go down the slow pathway. When it reaches this point, this becomes a excitable tissue again. This is excitable gap, and it goes up and starts re-entry. So there has to be a situation where there is a substrate, there has to be re-entrant mechanism, there has to be a trigger. That is how it will produce a re-entrant arrhythmia. If we make it a little bigger, central area of block, structural, it could be structural or functional. Here it is. See, like for example, if this is excitable gap, it is partially recovered, it's a fully recovered. So when the wavefront is going like this, it goes like this, and it is recovered, it will stimulate this, and that is how re-entry is set up. It forms the anchoring point of re-entrant circuit in these patients. So re-entry typical forms of unidirectional block, which we have already discussed actually. Normal sinus rhythm, what happens when you are having normal sinus rhythm, the slow conduction and the fast conduction, both pathways are excited and the impulse travel through both, and it joins in the lower part of the AV node and it goes down. So that's a normal beat. But when it's a long refractory area, and if there is a APC, it's not PVC, it's a atrial premature contraction. Now atrial, if the premature contraction, because the fast pathway has not recovered, it gets blocked here, and it goes down the slow pathway and comes back. By the time it reaches here, it becomes excitable, and that is how re-entry is initiated. This is the commonest kind of arrhythmia which you see in AV nodal reentrant tachycardia or in atrioventricular reentrant tachycardia. When we go to a VT, for example, in ischemic heart disease, the circuit may be much more complex. For example, here there is a inner loop, there may be outer loop, then there are areas of excitable areas, but they are bystander. They are not the main perpetuating pathway. Like here is the entrance site and here is the exit site. So if you want to terminate this arrhythmia permanently, you have to produce a ablation over this area so that exit is blocked. So there has to be a scar, central area of block, area of slow conduction, unidirectional block as we talked before, and there has to be trigger. Trigger is usually PVC in ventricular tachycardia. Well, now let's go to this is now, if I have to remind you again, basically the mechanism of arrhythmias are either re-entry or it is the enhanced automaticity or triggered activity. Okay. Now, in very, very brief, if I have to tell the physicians, usually re-entry means that the circuit is bigger, though it could be a small circuit or a functional circuit, but usually many times it is the anatomical circuit. But the increased enhanced atomicity and triggered activity, they are local phenomena. So they are point phenomena, and that is how you should remember. Now coming to the arrhythmia classification, it depends on site of the origin and the pathophysiology, and Avinash told already the conduction system, the sinus node, the AV node, and the his bundle branches, and right bundle. The left bundle has basically two fascicles. The posterior fascicle is this, anterior fascicle is this. and this is how the electricity gets conducted into the ventricles. And he also told that the last part of the ventricle to be depolarized is the upper portion of the left ventricle in a normal conduction system. And so you could have either atrial or junctional or ventricular arrhythmia. So this is how you should divide. And this diagram I made it myself to just explain you further. Let's say this is the junction of the heart. This is the AV node, right atrium and left atrium. Any arrhythmia which comes from the atrial tissue, this is called atrial arrhythmia. Atrial arrhythmias are atrial premature contraction, atrial tachycardia, atrial flutter, and atrial fibrillation. So these are 4 atrial arrhythmias. Now, when you go to the junction of the heart, there are basically 3 arrhythmias. One is atrioventricular nodal reentrant tachycardia, when the reentry is occurring in the AV node. Then there is a AVRT, atrioventricular, if there is accessory pathway. So that's another one of the commonest arrhythmia based on the junction. And third is what is called a JET. JET is a junctional ectopic tachycardia. Now, JET occurs in children, not very common arrhythmia, but it is very difficult to treat. And it is not based on re-entry, it is based on enhanced automaticity from the junction. And anything which, any arrhythmia which arises from the ventricles, either right or left or the septum, will be called as ventricular. And there are 3 kinds, either ventricular premature contraction or ventricular tachycardia or ventricular fibrillation. I think this concept you must conceptualize. And please, now anything, usually either the atrial or the junctional arrhythmias, tachycardia, they are narrow complex. Normally, BT of course will be broad complex, though of course there are some situations where even the supraventricular tachycardia may be broad complex. We'll come to that if we get time regarding that. But primarily, when you have a narrow complex tachycardia, please try to differentiate whether it is a junctional tachycardia or it's a atrial arrhythmia. You should be able to say either it is the AVNRT or AVRT, or it is a atrial flutter or atrial fibrillation. If you say, if the patient has atrial flutter, if you tell them this is a PSVT or a supraventricular tachycardia, that is not enough. You must go further to define the exact nature of the arrhythmia so that people should understand what you are talking about. So this is the classification based on morphology. Narrow complex. Narrow complex, if it is a regular, it could supraventricular tachycardia. That means either AVNRT or AVRT, or it could be atrial tachycardia, or it could be, if it's a, sometimes atrial flutter can be very regular, particularly when they have a 2:1 block, it will be regular, but atrial flutter can be regular. When we go to the narrow complex but irregular, it is usually most common arrhythmia, the atrial fibrillation or multifocal atrial tachycardia. But remember, sometimes even your atrial flutter, if it is a varying block, it could be irregular. Here we have not mentioned, but if it's a varying block, atrial flutter can be also irregular. But there is some kind of irregularity in that. Now we go to wide complex tachycardia. Wide complex means any QRS more than 120 milliseconds. If it is irregular, then 85% chances are it is a VT. But there are 15% chances that it could be supraventricular tachycardia, either with a pre-existing bundle mass block, or it could be a functional block, which is called as aberrancy. Functional means there is no disease of the left or the right bundle, but during tachycardia, it becomes broad and it's a functional block. Thirdly, you can have a wide complex tachycardia as a supraventricular tachycardia, which is called Mahem tachycardia. Mahem tachycardia is a tachycardia where the accessory pathway conducts only antegradially from atria to the ventricle, directly to the right ventricle, and the retrograde limb is the His-Purkinje system. So again, this is a young people, broad complex tachycardia, usually left bundle branch morphology type, which will look, so remember Mahem tachycardia. If you have a wide complex, but it's irregular, then most important is atrial fibrillation if it is being conducted on the accessory pathway. But you could have a atrial fibrillation with a pre-existing bundle branch block, either right or left bundle, that will be also irregular, but it will be a atrial fibrillation. So here again, regular, irregular, I think we have. Now, if we come to the narrow complex, it could be sinus tachycardia, atrial flutter, AV, junctional reentrant tachycardia, either AVRT or AVNRT, atrial tachycardia, junctional ectopic tachycardia. They are narrow complex. Wide complex, usually ventricular tachycardia. It could be SVT with bundle branch block pre-existing. Also, it could be a pace rhythm. So remember, sometimes it could be a pacemaker mediated tachycardia. Antidromic tachycardia is another broad complex tachycardia, where the antegrade limb is the pathway, retrograde is in the his Purkinje system, and pre-excited supraventricular tachycardia, that is usually, you have pre-excited SVT is primarily Mahem tachycardia, regular one. Now, when we come to the irregular, narrow QRS, atrial fibrillation, flutter, bearing block, and the multifocal atrial tachycardia. These are the irregular tachycardias. And what about wide QRS? If you have atrial fibrillation with bundle branch block, atrial flutter variable, block again, pre-excited atrial fibrillation on a pathway, polymorphic ventricular tachycardia. So this diagram, this slide is important to remember. I think you will be able to help your patients much better. Now, if you go to the mechanism, the AV node independent atrial tachycardia is a sinus tachycardia, ectopic atrial tachycardia, atrial flutter, atrial fibrillation. That means these arrhythmias, they don't need the AV node, they don't need the ventricles for perpetuation. AV node dependent, they are called junctional tachycardia, AV node reentry or AV reentry, or junctional ectopic tachycardia. Primarily, most of these arrhythmias are reentry, and it is very few, like ectopic atrial tachycardia could be automaticity, and even jet is a enhanced automaticity. These are the two tachycardias which are not based on reentry. So is every SVT a supraventricular tachycardia, a PSVT? Like supraventricular tachycardia, maybe junctional tachycardia, it could be atrial tachycardia, it could be atrial fibrillation. We have, I think, talked about this. This is just to tell you the classification SVT is based on P wave. P wave is a very important. This is baseline. Here there is a patient with tachycardia, but there are no P waves visible. So if you don't see P waves, it is basically a AV nodal reentrant tachycardia, because both the atria and ventricles are excited at the same time, so the P waves are hidden under the QRS complex. If you have a P wave outside the QRS complex, short RP, supraventricular RP, we say RP interval, RP and PR. See, PR is much longer here, RP is very small. So usually it is orthodromic tachycardia. If you have a long RP like this, it could be atrial tachycardia, or it could be atypical AV node reentry, or it could be orthodromic SVT, which is a very slowly conducting accessory pathway. Now, long RP versus short RP tachycardia. This is how you, this is RP, this is P wave, this is PR. A detailed discussion, will be done in the later stage when we go to the supraventricular tachycardia physiology and description. But I think in this talk, you should only remember one thing, that these are the two intervals we have to look for further classification of arrhythmia. This the re-entry we have already discussed, fast pathway, slow pathway, and the premature atrial ectopic getting blocked here, going down, and by the time it reaches here, it becomes excitable, it goes up, and this is how this circuit starts. This is a macro, this is an anatomical circuit with two limbs. So no P waves if we don't see only QRS complexes. Because why? Because the circuit, the re-entry is like this, it goes up, it goes down. To the ventricles, it goes up to the atrium. So the atrial contractions are hidden under the QRS complex. So you see only QRS, RRR, and nothing else. So this is a AV nodal re-entry tachycardia. But if you have a retrograde P waves are seen outside the QRS complex, it is based on orthodromic tachycardia based on some kind of accessory pathway in this patient. I think we can shorten this. And this is the original, work published many years back in 1933. How the arrhythmias are produced in the accessory pathway. Supposing this is the accessory pathway on the right side here. Normally during sinus rhythm, what will happen? The impulse travels by normal His-Purkinje system, also by accessory pathway. So the amount of ventricle which is directly being stimulated by the pathway will present as a delta wave. The QRS will become wide and it will be PQR. The PR interval will be short because you have a direct access from the atrium to the ventricle through the accessory pathway. And during tachycardia, now there are two kinds. This is orthodromic tachycardia. During orthodromic tachycardia, the pulse goes down the normal pathway. Ortho means straight, and it goes down like this, and retrogradely it goes through the accessory pathway. So the circuit is like this. Narrow QRS tachycardia, this is called orthodromic tachycardia. And if you have a situation where if the tachycardia travels like this, it goes directly over the accessory pathway, then retrogradely over the His-Purkinje system, then it will be broad complex tachycardia. Then it is called antidromic tachycardia. Remember, in accessory pathways, around 15% of the arrhythmias are antidromic, but 85% are primarily orthodromic tachycardia. So orthodromic is much more common, but you can have in the same patient at one time orthodromic narrow complex, at other time antidromic tachycardia. So this is a typical ECG of a pre-excitation WW pattern. You see PR interval is very small and there is a initial slurring of the QRS complex delta wave. This is a right side of the pathway. By seeing ECG, you could go even and explain whether it is right side or left side, anterior or posterior, and things of that nature. You can always say. This is the same thing about the accessory pathway. Normally you have a situation where you can have a conduction over both pathway as well as the normal Purkinje system. But supposing if it gets blocked here and it goes down and goes back again, it starts the orthodromic tachycardia. So premature atrial complex can induce the orthodromic tachycardia or antidromic tachycardia. This is what we do in the lab. And this is the story of a orthodromic tachycardia going down over the AV node and His-Purkinje system going up the accessory pathway. And you see P waves after the QRS complex, which are inverted because the atria are being stimulated from below. And in the ECG, if you see P wave inverted after the QRS complex, then it is AVRT. It is not AV in RT. In case of antidromic, this is what is antidromic. So antidromic, it goes down the pathway, bypass track, and up it goes to the normal His-Purkinje system. I think the rest of the things we have already talked. If you have a atrial fibrillation, we have atrial fibrillation? No, we don't. Anyway, if you have a atrial fibrillation, then the conduction is over both. It will be over the bypass track as well as in the His-Purkinje system. So it will be broad complex, but even the bits of the QRS will go on varying from time to time, and that is one thing. Now this is it. Yeah, this is a typical ECG which many of the physicians will diagnose the ventricular tachycardia. But if you see carefully, It's a very irregularly broad complex tachycardia, and even if you see the width of the QRS complex goes on varying because it depends on how much is the pre-excitation in a particular beat. This is the typical ECG of a accessory pathway atrial fibrillation, which is called a pre-excited tachycardia. Now going to the VT, again it is a reentrant or automatic or triggered activity, the same mechanisms, and this is a story of ventricular topics, very commonly it's a triggered activity, and again RVOTVT is a triggered mechanism. So obviously it means it is not a it's not a re-entering circuit, so you have to go to a particular point to ablate these tachycardias. Or set point 2, this is early after depolarization, phase 2 re-entry. I don't think you need to remember so much. So in a polymorphic VT degenerating into VF spiral wave, there are rotors to perpetuate this kind of tachycardia. Reentrant ventricular tachyarrhythmias, premature ventricular complexes, idiopathic left ventricular tachycardia, fascicular VT is a reentrant tachycardia, bundle branch reentry is a reentry, scar VT is a typical reentry. Patients have mostly previous myocardial infarction. This is a story of the fascicular idioventricular reentrant tachycardia. See, it goes like this. The posterior fascicle, it goes anterior fascicle, and this is how the tachycardia occurs. If you have a fascicular ventricular tachycardia, these tachycardias are many times diagnosed as SVT by the physician because they are actually not so broad. Of course, they are not narrow. If you calculate the QRS, it will not be less than 100. It will be around 130 milliseconds or so. So it's a relatively narrow, relatively broad. Both ways, you should keep the possibility of a fascicular ventricular tachycardia. Bundle branch reentry is, it uses one bundle downward like right bundle, and then through the septum going to the left bundle, or it could be the other way around. When you have this kind of tachycardia, like this patient has a basically left bundle branch block, and during tachycardia the morphology remains same. The only thing is rate changes. It becomes a very fast rate. So this is not when you have a underlying bundle branch block, particularly if you have a cardiomyopathy, this usually is not AVNRT or a supraventricular tachycardia. This you should keep the possibility of bundle branch reentry. And mind you, these bundle branch reentry is curable. We ablate one of the bundles, usually left or the right bundle, and the tachycardia can be finished. This is a typical scar VT, and we have discussed about it. Usually they are much more complex reentrant circuits in these patients. It may not be one, it may be two or more than two circuits. That usually they are not functional reentry. They are basically anatomical based macro reentry. Now ECG of ischemia, I'll try to be as quick as possible. See, at the resting state, the outside of cell is positively charged, as I think Avinash told you already. Inside is negatively charged. When depolarization occurs, inside of the cell becomes positive, outside of the depolarized cell is now negative. So this is how the normal depolarization occurs. This is a galvanometer, and you measure the difference in the changing potential. The true isoelectric line is when there is no current flow, and that is really diastole. The current is zero when all the heart has depolarized. So ST segment is what is called as when all the heart has depolarized. That's ST segment. In the presence of ischemia, when all the heart has depolarized, you take TP segment as the segment when there is a in presence of ischemia. So it's a false in presence of ischemia, and the current is not zero. It is never zero because the current continues to flow during ischemia. The ischemic myocardium is different than the normal myocardium. Current of injury. See, when heart muscle becomes ischemic, cell membrane, the integrity of the membrane is disturbed. So the potassium accumulates the outside the cell. Injured muscle becomes persistently depolarized. This is important to remember. Heart remains partially or totally depolarized all the time. When this occurs, current flows between the pathologically depolarized and the normally polarized areas, even between the heartbeats. This is called a current of injury. This is how we describe it. A negative current flows from a healthy tissue to the injured tissue. Positive current flows from the injured to the healthy tissue. So this is how you have systolic and diastolic currents of injury. There is a normal myocardium action potential. This is ischemic action potential. See, there is always a gap in this. It is never an isoelectric line. So that is how you get ST elevation or ST depression in these patients. A current of injury from the injured to the normal tissue is established, which can be detected on an ECG. What J point becomes the true isoelectric point. J point is this. It becomes the isoelectric line. So what you see is that is why it's a new normal. So this is not. That's why you read it as a ST depression. It's a subendocardial ischemia, so you get ST depression. If it's a transmural, you get ST elevation because this is the J point. J point is a new isoelectric line. The positive injury current shifts the baseline upwards during diastole. Negative injury current shifts the baseline downward during diastole. So this is the ST segment depression. This is a subendocardial. This is arresting. This is a depolarized. So when the heart is totally depolarized, and this is a repolarization. So this is ST elevation and ST elevation, depression here and depression here. The positive injury current shifts the baseline upward during diastole. Negative injury, we have already talked. It shifts baseline downward during the diastole. So that is how you have this is resting. This is depolarized. This is repolarized. So that is how it becomes the new baseline. It shifts up. That is how it looks like a ST elevation. So then there are some mimics, like you could have a normal, you could have a Brugada, you could have a different kind of action potentials, which you have to differentiate from the true ischemia. And I have seen many young people who have the repolarization of normalities. So because they have a transmural voltage gradient due to the endo-epi voltage difference, so they can mimic like false ischemia, which you should remember always. Pericarditis is another situation where there is a epicardial injury current during systole and diastole, like transmural ischemia, and leading to ST elevation pattern in all leads except AVR. This is another repolarization syndrome, and you will see these difference in the action potentials in these patients. And like polymorph VT, this is phase 2 re-entry. I think we have already talked about it. So this is a little bit complex, I would say, but not so difficult. I thought this was the initiation of trying to tell you the physiology of arrhythmias and the classification of arrhythmias, because this is the basics of electrophysiology. If you understand this, then it will become very simple for you to go further. So in conclusion, mechanistic classification of arrhythmias is important for therapeutic decision making. SVT, supraventricular tachycardia, junctional or VT classification is mechanistic and according to the chamber of origin. SVT can further be classified into long RP or short RP tachycardia for diagnosis. This is important to remember. Understanding the mechanism and classification is the key to diagnosis making and further management of these patients. ST changes occur due to the injury current to the myocardium. Transmural dispersion of action potential causes ST elevation, and like in some of the early repolarization syndromes and in Brugada syndrome. I think with these remarks, I will stop, and Dr. Nash is with me. If there are some questions, we can take.
Yes, sir, we do have a few questions. Sir, do I start speaking out the questions?
Yeah.
Sure. So the first one is how to calculate rate if heart rate is irregular.
So over there, you go by the rule of 10 seconds. So what you do is roughly your ECG is taken for 6 seconds or 10 seconds, depending upon your ECG settings. So you calculate that overall number of complexes in those 6 to 10 seconds. If your ECG, so in every machine, it's different. If your ECG takes 6-second ECGs, in that case, you multiply by 10. And if your ECG takes 10-second ECGs, then you multiply by 6. So that's how you do for irregular intervals. You don't take between two beats.
So there's another question which says, can you explain the quadrant method again?
Yeah, so the quadrant method is basically what you do is you try to take a lead and then plot or cover the entire that segment. So maybe if I can, share that presentation, it will become more easy for you to understand. Yeah. So the quadrant method is, yeah. So this is the quadrant method. So for example, over here you want to calculate what is the lead. So lead 1, you take the net deflection in lead 1. So net deflection in lead 1 will be, suppose this is 7 positive and 3 negative. So net deflection will be around +4. So you shade this entire area. So 1 will be positive in entire this region. So your axis can be anywhere. So you shade this half. And then for AVF, your net is negative. So it's nearly 10 negative and 2 positive. So net around -7. So -7 will be towards this side of the AVF. This is plus AVF, this is minus. So you shade this entire hemisphere. So if you combine both these hemispheres, there is an overlapping quadrant. Whichever is the overlapping quadrant, that is your quadrant of axis. So over here, your overlapping quadrant is 0 to -90. So it will become a left axis deviation. So either you can picture this like quadrant, or you can, simple like we used to remember in MBBS. If lead 1 and AVF are leaving each other, it's a left axis deviation. It basically says the same thing. 1 and AVF leaving each other means 1 is positive, AVF is negative. Then it's a left axis
basically,
deviation.
I think it is very easy to calculate the axis. If you consider first 2 leads, 1 and AVF. If you see 1 and AVF, you can pinpoint to one quadrant. See, either it is a 0 to +90 or +90 to 180 or from 0 to -90. After that, what you can do is that you keep that hexagram in your clinic. Then it becomes very easy to calculate the axis.
Yeah. For example, this is another example of the quadrant. So here AVF is also net negative. It's around
Can you show the
-6.
hexagram?
Yeah. And this is also negative. So if you color both the hemispheres negative, the overlapping quadrant is your quadrant of axis. So I'll just show the hexagram.
Yeah, show the hexagram. Yeah, I think if you remember this picture, you should keep in your clinic. Then it becomes very easy. See, if 1 is positive, for example, that means the axis is in this.
Yeah.
In this hemisphere. If AVF is positive, then it is in this hemisphere.
So the overlapping quadrant is this.
Overlapping is this. That means the axis has to be in this quadrant. Then you can see AVR and 2.
Yeah.
You may not remember, everything you can't remember in life. So it is better that you keep this diagram, hexagram in your pocket or in your clinic always. Because the axis is very, very important. If you can calculate the P wave axis, the QRS axis, then a lot of arrhythmia you can diagnose accurately. Yes, are you any more question?
Yes, sir. There are a few more questions. I'll just tell you first. Can you explain about Wilson Central Terminal and Goldberger Central Terminal again?
Okay, so Wilson Central Terminus was calculated to see the unipolar lead. For example, you have to measure the chest leads. As you all remember, all the chest leads are unipolar leads. They are not bipolar lead. Unipolar means one positive and negative is ground. So how do you make ground in an ECG machine? So what you do is you take patients all limb leads, you connect it to the negative terminal of the galvanometer or the ECG. That takes as the ground. So that becomes your ground voltage. So that becomes your negative. So if you combine all three, RA, LA, and LV, if you combine all three and then connect it to your negative terminal of the ECG of the measuring pole, then that becomes the negative terminal, and the positive terminal then becomes the unipolar lead, whichever you want to measure. So that is called the Wilson central terminus. It basically combines all the three leads. On the other hand, in augmented lead or Goldberger's augmented leads, you don't calculate Wilson central terminus. Instead, you calculate indifferent electrode. The difference is that in Wilson central terminus, you are combining all three voltages from all three leads. On the other hand, in augmented leads, you are just combining the rest of the two leads. So Wilson central terminus, all three leads combined. If you want to measure for example, V1, V2, V3, you can combine all three leads, all three limb leads, no problem. On the other hand, if suppose you want to measure unipolar of your left arm, then first of all, you have to combine all three and then again measure the left arm. So there will be a duplicacy of left arm. So what Goldberger did was, instead of Wilson central terminus, he removed it and just combined rest of the two terminus. That is called indifferent electrode. So that's the difference between indifferent electrode and a Wilson central terminus. So if you use indifferent electrode, your the electrograms gets augmented by 50%. So that is why it is called augmented unipolar limb leads.
Arju, we can take two more questions.
Sure, sir. So one is, what if, just give me a second. What if all leads showing biphasic complexes, then what do we do?
It's indeterminate axis.
All right.
If all the leads are like this, for example, I'll show you. If everything is like this, it's indeterminate axis. You cannot find the axis.
But it will be very, very rare situation.
It's very rare. Mostly the heart will be filled with scar and all. So there are multiple wavefronts coming from everywhere. So there you will get this.
Right. So, sir, another one is, how from the ECG one can conclude in which artery the block is, whether it is an RCA, LAD, or LCX?
We will be having a separate whole talk about localization in MI. Localization of MI, there will be a separate talk. It's a long.
Not only we will tell you how do we diagnose the anterior or inferior lateral infarction. We will also tell you that in for example, anterior infarction, whether the blockage is before the first septal, before the first diagonal, after the diagonal. So there's a whole lot of information available. We will give another talk on that issue.
Yeah, LBBB with MI, pre-excitation with MI, pacing with MI. So there are lots of things to discuss in MI. So that will be a separate lecture.
Sure, sir. So, sir, there are about 10 more questions. If it is okay, we can take it up in the WhatsApp group that we create post the session. Yeah, I'll just take a note of all the questions.
Yeah.
So, sir, can we conclude the session now?
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure. Thank you so much, Dr. Avinash and Dr. Claire, for the wonderful session. Seeing the questions only, I can figure out what a wonderful session it was, and everybody is overwhelmed with it. So, sir, if you have any final comments, please do that.
No, the only thing I want to tell the physicians, the doctors, that ECG gives you a lot of information. It's a simple tool. It's available every year. It is the most cost-effective investigation. It doesn't tell you only the ischemia or myocardial infarction. It tells the area. It tells you the prognosis. In arrhythmias, it can tell from where the arrhythmia is coming, supraventricular or junctional or ventricular, and it tells you a lot of physiology. And you don't have to be electrophysiologist to understand this. Believe me, if you can understand ECG, you are 90% electrophysiologist. 10% you can leave to us. That we will do ourselves. Thank you very much. I think with that we can conclude the session, and the next session, the topics we will let you know very soon.
Sure, sir. Thank you so much for your valuable time. We will now conclude this session, and I will end the meeting.
Thank you, Dr. Claire. Thank you, Arju.
Thanks, Dave.
बहुत लोग थे।
410।
आशीष नाबर थे। आशीष नाबर।
हाँ जी, आइए प्लीज।
विकास